Are you pregnant or a new parent looking to ensure a better postpartum experience? Or are you a birth worker looking to improve your postpartum care skills? Check out Thriving After Birth, an online self-paced course by me, midwife and educator Tanya Tringali. It's 10 and a half hours of video content featuring experts in lactation, mental health, pelvic floor health, pediatric sleep issues. You also get worksheets and a workbook, as well as options to have a one-on-one session with me. Sign up at motherwitmaternity.com/thriving, and let's improve postpartum care together. Today is Jennifer Hampton. She is a licensed clinical social worker who has a particular interest and specialized training in perinatal mental health. She is a frequent member of my interdisciplinary team. Jennifer has a rather unique way of melding her experiences as a therapist, mom, and coach. And although I've never had a session with her myself, there is a common theme that I get from my clients when they report back to me. And boy, do I wish I could be a fly on the wall. Anyway, I'll let you, the listener, see if you can put your own finger on what it is that makes her such a special and welcome addition to my team. Welcome, Jen. Thanks so much for joining me today. Oh, and a gentle reminder that nothing we discuss on this show should ever be considered medical advice. Please speak to your local provider about anything that comes up in this show that resonates with you and your needs and your healthcare.
Thank you. It's really nice to be here and to be able to talk about reproductive health and the journey that women and families go through.
Yeah. And, what I think is so interesting is the way that we kind of organically fit together like little puzzle pieces, it starts to seem, because it is becoming more and more common over time that you end up seeing a lot of my clients. Like, I have a grad student right now who's working on my statistics. So I don't have a real handle on this. I'm guessing at the moment, but at some point very soon, I'm going to know the actual numbers of what percentage of my clients you've actually seen. But wow. I'm going to guess it's in the ballpark of more than 50%.
Wow.
And, we'll unpack this a bit later, but, you have this amazing way of seeing people one time and making a profound impact on their experience of becoming a parent. And, for other people, I know that you've had extended relationships, and I've even lost track of some of those because I don't get updates at some point. So it's very broad and varied, and you have a particular approach. And that's really why I wanted to share you with my audience today, because I have the pleasure of knowing your work and knowing what it is about you that makes you so different and special. But I want our listeners to hear this too. And in part, that's because for myself anyway, I am less and less interested as I get older in very traditional forms of therapy. And I think part of what drew me to you was a recognition early on that what you were offering my clients wasn't standard. And I every time I talk to you about someone, I say, I wish I could be a fly on the wall, but all I know is what you guys come back and tell me. But from what you guys come back and tell me, this isn't the standard run-of-the-mill thing. And so maybe you'll unpack that for us in a bit. But before you do that, I would love it if you would tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, some personal details, whatever you feel comfortable, and then we can kind of unpack your professional journey.
Excellent. Well, I am a social worker by trade. Grew up in Texas, so I'm a Southerner, and was sort of, looking back, was pretty much the counselor in my family. Our family was very much into community service, so it's no surprise that I went into a helping profession. Initially, I was thinking I was going to go a PhD track in cognitive psychology because I thought it was really fascinating studying how minds and, people's minds and motivations. I also, in college, started out with a bachelor in psych, but also studied theater, actually, because I was fascinated by characters. I used to read plays all the time, and was just trying to kind of get in the role of and get in the mind of these fictional characters and become them was fascinating to me. Up until the point where I did not want to wait tables for the rest of my life and realized that, going into counseling was probably a better choice career-wise for me. And the more I studied it, the more I realized, hey, I get to do the same thing as theater, except I get to understand the minds and motivations of real people.
You just totally clued me into perhaps another reason why I have adored you from day one. I too was like a high school theater nerd, and being in plays and absorbing characters was my first form of therapy as well.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you know this, and I've talked about this on another podcast with, I think it was Kim actually, or
Really?
Kim, the lactation consultant, who's on episode 3 of the first season for anyone who wants to go back and check that out. But Jen knows Kim as well. Kim has a theater background, and I said the same thing to her on the podcast. Like, this is a reason that I love you. I knew it. Every time I have a colleague that I adore, I realize long before we knew each other, and something we don't talk to about, with each other, is this background. But it makes perfect sense. And so something I don't know if you know is like a gazillion midwives have either theater or, in some ways, maybe even more, dance backgrounds.
Fantastic. Well, the only reason I did not become a ballerina was I injured my knee when I was about 17. My whole life was ballet until I was about 17. And then I got out of that, and I actually found theater because it was the closest thing that reminded me of dance. And then did that through college. Loved it. I would switch back and forth between majoring in theater and majoring in psychology every semester, so I could take the really good classes under that major. And then I got out of school and had never thought about social work in a million years. I thought social workers were people that evaluated child abuse cases and, decided whether people qualified for welfare assistance. And that really wasn't my focus, what I was most interested in. As I said, I was interested in research and how, people's cognition, how they perceive the world, why they did what they did. But maybe because of the theater background, I got bored in a lab, and I really wanted to just be having these conversations rather than looking at data points only.
So let's pause there for a second, because I do think that this is an interesting misconception that maybe I've never even fully unpacked. I've just known this fact for so long that I've come to accept it. I too, at one point, remember being quite surprised that social workers were therapists, right? You think therapist, you think psychologist is a synonym for that.
Yep.
And then I realized that almost every therapist on an insurance plan or anywhere else has LCSW behind their name. So unpack for our listeners kind of how it is that somebody gets a bachelor's, let's say, in social work, and then makes their way to becoming a therapist.
Okay. So you can definitely do social work with a master's. I did psychology, then did master's social work. And I really chose social work. It was largely because my dad, he worked in human resources. He had an MBA, and he had some friends that were social work counselors and said, well, you're interested in counseling. Are you interested in 5 or 6 years of debt before you really get out of school and see if that's what you want to do? Or are you interested in doing a 2 years master's program and then doing 3 years of clinical training on top of that? So still 5 years, but out actually in the field, applying these skills in real world, agencies and in communities to see if that's a good fit for you. And so for me, it was the most practical choice financially, looking at student loans, that I'm sure anybody who's gone down that academic road, they're doing the math. And so the more I learned about it, it really fit with growing up in a family that was very committed to community service and, just taking that sort of to the next level. what I liked about social work is it's so, I say it's sort of an inch deep and a mile wide, where, I have a funny story of a psychologist friend of mine. She's an extraordinary psychologist, but I can remember her doing a residency at Bellevue in New York and talking about a client that she had that was hospitalized after an overdose, and saying, this woman lost her husband and found out he was in a lot of debt, and they had no kids, and she was in her late 60s. And, she thought she was out on the streets of New York, first time in her life, was very scared about that and didn't want to stay in shelters, was scared to be there. And ultimately, took a bunch of pills and thought, that was the way out, because nothing was ever going to change or get better. And life was just very fearful for her. And I can remember my friend, just saying, and I go in and I have these, 50-minute sessions at her bedside, and we're talking about all this stuff, and it doesn't seem to be getting any traction. And I said, have you dealt with her housing issue? Have you connected her to her community? Have you put her in a group with others and dealt with social support? Have you looked at where she's going to get any kind of financial assistance with this extreme debt that she's now saddled with? Because if it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you don't handle any of the rest of that, then 50-minute therapy sessions aren't going to do a whole lot. And so that was really when it turned for me. It kind of turned that page and solidified my choice to be in social work, because the way we approach problems is, it's not better or worse, it's just different. We really are about take care of their basic needs, listen to what they tell you they are missing, start where the client is, and that's where you gain the most traction. You cannot go down your own path or a formulaic academic road of an intervention and skip over all that. You can't do that. You're doing a disservice to your clients.
So much of what you just said could be an analogy for midwives and obstetricians, right? It's not that obstetricians don't do amazing work. It's that we see things through such a different lens, and midwives want to find all the other problems that contribute to why someone, for instance, here's a great example that I'm sure you've heard many times. When somebody writes in a medical chart that a patient is non-compliant, right? Like that's like the worst terminology that ever was. Like the second that thought occurs to you, you should be asking yourself 100 questions about why this person has a hard time making it in for care, instead of shaming them for not making it in for care, right? It's the same kind of thinking.
Well, and we have to really, part of it is check our own stuff at the door. And that includes the privilege we walk into, that however we got here, we have, bachelor's, graduate, postgraduate degrees. And, we got that from something, and we're successful from somewhere. And we have people supporting us, and we've had opportunities that many of our clients have not. They just haven't. And so we can't look through the lens as if, if I say somebody's non-compliant, I'm assuming they've got a car and can pay $6 to put gas in the car. And I assume that the doctor they're calling is picking up that phone right away and getting them in as soon as possible. That they don't have kids at home, that they don't have a job, or they have a job that doesn't care when they come and go, that they can sit in a waiting room for an hour to see, an obstetrician that's behind that day, or whatever it is. And it's just, to your point, it's not the way we think of it. We think of what are the barriers keeping this client from, getting the treatment they need, and more than need, deserve.
Absolutely. Did you by chance watch the show on Netflix called Made?
No.
Watch that one.
With a 7-year-old, we really don't, watch more than Pixar and Disney. Unfortunately, I haven't watched a show for myself in years.
It sounds like the perinatal mental health specialist needs a little self-care.
Right.
That's fair. I understand. I've been there. I'm just far away from that at this point. Okay. So tell us a little bit more about your journey from well, tell us a little bit, because I know some of these stories already and they're great. Your journey through the various forms of social work and the different populations you worked with along the way that ultimately led you to perinatal mental health.
Okay, well, let's see. So in the process of getting my graduate degree, I was able to work with, at the time, what we called in Texas, emotionally disturbed children with special education, K through 12. And some of the kids I saw in school, many of the kids I saw for counseling were no longer deemed appropriate to, study and attend class in the school setting. They were in an alternative school. And so I did that for an internship. And then my next internship ended up being really pivotal for me. It was in a trauma center. So at the time, level 3 trauma center. So we were the indigent care hospital. We served 36 counties as a trauma center. We served 42 counties as a children's hospital. So I worked in the emergency room and occasionally in the operating room or post-op and ICU. And so, very quickly I was seeing, babies through elderly and, doing a lot of crisis work and working on these multidisciplinary teams that all kind of had their own agenda in this very big bureaucratic system. I fell in love with the work and ended up doing that postgraduate and actually worked there for 10 years and saw them go through, their own, growth and change. I tell people I worked in ER for, 10 years, probably 5 years too long. It definitely skews. You go from like loving to be the champion and riding the rush of the EMS encoder and all of these things to realizing that your perspective in the world has shifted. I used to spend Fridays, which were my day off, I used to grab a sack lunch and go to a local playground. I'd pick a playground every Friday just to watch normal, healthy families hang out. Because the families I saw, Monday through Thursday were ones that had something catastrophic happen to them and were full of, grief and sometimes full of tubes. And so it's very different. I think through that, I really recognized that it was time for me to make a change. I was really drawn to going into more preventative care than, Band-Aids and maybe not doing quite so much crisis and grief work. And so I helped with a project to work with a community pediatric practice and family practice to try to, integrate mental health and case management services so that they got more holistic WH, the more wraparound care. Because a lot of these families were low income and they had a lot of needs that they were seeing the doctor for, but the doctor really couldn't address. So I was helping out with that. And then, like so many people's story, I met someone and fell in love, and that person happened to be in the Air Force. And so we moved to England. I got a job at a U.S. Air Force base in England and worked with active duty members and their families, and also some British civilian employees and their families that worked on the base, and really dug into, family advocacy and what keeps the family thriving, and how things like moving every couple of years and deployments and just military culture can sometimes sink that ship. And so I did that, which was not exactly prevention, but it was out of the emergency room, and did that for a couple of years. Then we moved to Santiago, Chile, and we're stationed with the embassy. And so during that time, because of the SOFA agreement, which I won't go into, but basically, laws and regulations about when Americans, civilians can work overseas, I wasn't able to work specifically in my profession. So I volunteered for a Chilean organization that provided all kinds of services, job training, healthcare, mental health care, literacy services to low-income Chileans and their families. And then from there, started doing some coaching and counseling off the books, just as a hobby with some embassy personnel and their partners. Really enjoyed doing that. I trained in coaching and really enjoyed it as a, life coaching, as a preventative model. And then we got stationed Travis Air Force Base in California, where my husband did his last year. And before he decided to leave that career, and I had a baby and started a private practice. And so I've been doing that for, since 2017. And I think, to kind of pull all this to, how that equals perinatal healthcare or mental health care. During the time we were in Chile, we tried to get pregnant for a while. We got pregnant. We experienced pregnancy loss there. And then, went through another pregnancy here in California. Had a child, very healthy child, but was 10 days late and had some unfortunate experiences in the hospital with my care that sort of teed me up for postpartum anxiety and some depression. My husband was still, in the military at the time. So I think he had 2 days off after delivery or after we came home from the hospital. And then he was back full time, didn't have a support system here, all the things that we know are risk factors. And so that led me through a journey of getting myself well. And then really noticing the lack of services in and around Napa and the Bay Area that directly helped women and their families, parents to be and new parents go through some of those experiences. So I got involved with a local moms group and kind of parlayed my, some additional training I did and my interests into starting sort of a wing of this moms group that was doing maternal mental health. And I started doing peer support groups for, mainly for moms and moms to be, although we never excluded, men or anyone from it, but did those weekly and just try to create, connections and try to make sure that we involve the community in ways that people had places to go and had options to seek out the care they needed. We were involved with Postpartum Support International and some of the other, national and international organizations, Blue Dot Project. This group had brought me in after a mom specifically had sought me to start these meetings to take over facilitating these meetings as a mental health professional, because not only was I, a couple of years postpartum at that point, but one of the moms in their group had taken her life, and they felt like just having peer support without having the mental health piece of it was a bit overwhelming. And so they asked me to just participate with that. And so that's it's a long-winded way of saying that was my evolution to, really getting fired up about the type of, services and support I provide now.
So when did you start your private practice, Moxie Mental Health? Is it
Moxie
Mental Health? Is that the full name?
Yes. Well, Moxie started in 2015. And then my son, when I first put my son in daycare, and then he started pinging for some sensory issues. So Moxie stopped, and I refocused my efforts on helping him with a marvelous occupational therapist and kind of getting some of his sensory issues, supported. That's really important to do if you can before age 3. So kind of jumped right into that. And then once he was 3 and seemed to be in a really good place, and I could find a good program for him to grow, Then I reopened the doors in 2017, and I've been, doing that since then.
And you don't exclusively see perinatal mental health, even though that is a specialty of yours, right?
Oh no. I see I see individuals, I see couples, I see families for any number of concerns. The only age range I won't see is, I would say, under 7, because being a mom of a 7-year-old, I realize that sometimes in those cases I show up more like a mom than a therapist, which isn't a bad thing, but probably, a good time to refer. And, but I see people up to, I've got clients in their 80s. And then I don't see people who are acutely psychotic. I don't have just me kind of, it's one woman show in, my office downtown. I don't really feel like I have that bandwidth to do. I used to do that kind of work in the hospital, but there's so many more resources, readily accessible. So people who are even diagnosed with schizophrenia, I tend to refer out to other resources. But depression, anxiety, PTSD, learning disabilities, attention deficit disorder, alcoholism, body dysmorphia, other types of addictions, eating disorders, a lot of grief and loss, a lot of people transitioning, which can mean a lot of things. They can be transitioning, and if we were looking at it from a gender perspective, or transitioning between, working outside of the home and working inside of the home, or career changes, or going from military to civilian, or retirement, single to divorced. I mean, life is about change and transition. So we definitely do a lot of that.
That's a really interesting thing you just said, right? How you just combined transitioning in the context of gender along a larger spectrum. And I think if more people could do that, maybe there would be much less of an issue.
We had a marvelous conversation. I have a gender questioning, currently identified son. And it's been a really interesting journey, just personally, to go through, to really feel, not just know, but to feel the confines of labels. And I had this wonderful conversation with a client yesterday about, I think labels are the problem. As soon as there are labels, then now all of a sudden there's boundaries and boxes that can feel suffocating for some of us. For others, they work fine, but for the ones that don't, now we're steeped in, disappointment and shame and not meeting expectations. And I see that, across many aspects of life.
Well, you're right. It doesn't matter what we're talking about. I mean, we could segue into more specifically perinatal health just by saying, what does the label mother do to people?
Oh yeah. And I have to be really careful, because I have a Moxie Motherhood website. And then I think, well, who doesn't, mother is its own label, and who feels that that's a barrier, that I won't understand where they're coming from. And why don't I use the word parent? But then some people, like carer, because parent has its own box. And so got to name it something at the end of the day.
Yeah. No, I hear you.
So it's Moxie. At the end of the day, it's Moxie.
Moxie. I know. I've kind of done something similar, I think, because when I had to create a business name, right, that was always such a hard thing to do. I went with Mother Wit Maternity, and the fuller name is Mother Wit Maternity and Consulting Services, which I never say that second half. But over time, it's just become Mother Wit. Okay, so the legal business name has the word maternity, but it's just Mother Wit at this point. And mother's enough. I already have to contend with the word mother, but Mother Wit is a phrase that holds its own, I think, and has its own meaning. Okay, so you were just unpacking a bunch of the things that you treat and the types of people that you see, but let's zone in a little bit more on perinatal mental health. Give us a sense of the range of things that people come to you as their main concern, the reason that they are interested in seeing you?
We hope you're enjoying the Mother Wit podcast. If you are, please rate us and leave a review in iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to your podcast. Thanks so much. Now, back to the show.
Okay. I will tell you, if I'm going to talk about range, I will tell you from one end of the spectrum to the other. The first end of that spectrum is I have this urge to be a mother, to be a parent. And I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if my partner's on board. I have a history of trauma, and I'm scared of what kind of parent, how I will manifest in that role. I'm older, so I don't know if I can do that. I don't know what it'll look like. Two, I've been going through, I'm about to embark or have been going through fertility treatments. Pregnant again, experienced pregnancy loss, and now we're pregnant and I should be so excited, but I'm scared and grieving the loss. With each month that passes, that date where I lost that last pregnancy. So this is all the changes. How does my identity change? I'm a corporate lawyer, and I always frowned on people taking maternity leave or calling in sick because they had to take care of the kids. So how do I, deal with all this training and to be in this profession, and how my identity is going to change? And will I lose a sense of empowerment through that process? How will I integrate the way that I want to manifest being a parent with, the culture I'm from, the culture I live in, that might be different than my, own personal beliefs and values, or that of my partner, if I'm in a partnership, or against the larger culture, if I'm a single parent by choice. How does that look? I deal with a lot of people who are, just nervous. Maybe they have a history of depression or anxiety, and they have read about postpartum and, perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, and they're concerned that, it's lurking around the corner, and how's that going to change this experience for them? And will they be a capable parent? And then the adjustment. We've talked in other venues about matrescence, this idea of becoming a mother, and what that means. It's not diaper changes and breast or bottle feeding, although those are very important things. It's not just about scheduling. It's not just about home care or nanny or daycare choices, but it's about, how am I going to take on this new role, and how much of my life am I willing to give to that? And will it take over? And will any of the old me be left? What will that look like? What will my relationship, or relationships look like? I'm the first to have a baby. I'm the last to have a baby in my cohort of friends. How's that going to change the dynamics of who I am? So these are some of the, I'm probably missing stuff, but these are, the things that sort of preconception through the toddler years, I spend a lot of time with parents and parents to be.
So here are some more that come to mind, and these might be, my clients know that you exist as soon as they connect with me. So it's not like these are the moments when I tell them about you, but these are the moments when they get another nudge to come to when I'm like, ooh, this midwife hat is getting tight. This therapist hat, I should say, on the midwife hat is getting tight. One is, there's a lot of feelings about one's relationship with their own parents, and how that is going to affect their parenting, or the baby's already born, but all of that kind of rears its head, and all these feelings. And of course, they're happening at a time when you are sleep deprived, wondering if you're good enough. And that usually seems to be the trigger for that.
Right. Does grandma really know best?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And I think having someone like me on the healthcare, more obvious healthcare side of things, than someone like you who's a therapist, I really encourage people to, I don't know if compartmentalize is the right word, but to decide in advance who you're going to talk to, what about, right? So
Yeah.
like not every topic you need to talk about, do you need to talk with your mom about, or your sister or your BFF? Some things are maybe best for the client and me, or the client and you. And so we can kind of choose, like, these are the either safe or light or fun or whatever word it needs to be, things that I can talk to my mom about, or this person or that person. But no one can be all things to all people, which is why
Exactly.
I think it's so important that we form these teams.
Well, I mean, part of the conversations we have are, pick your peanut gallery. We tend to, people tend to wind up in session talking about all these people in their ear. And I'm like, oh, shut down the noise. Like, you can pick your peanut gallery. Like, at no other time in life can you actually do that, because when you're, pregnant or postpartum, I can't, got to take care of me, got to take care of the baby. And, you can set those boundaries. You don't think you can, but it's actually one of the best times, to set the boundary and get a pass on it.
Yeah. And I also have really started encouraging people, and I'm curious what you can add on to this, or maybe there's a better approach than what I'm doing. I've really been encouraging people who address these things, who verbalize these things, to have some introductory conversations with their parent about their expectations. So let's take that classic situation where, we don't live nearby our parents often anymore, especially the people who choose to use my services. They tend to be people who are aware that they're a bit more isolated. But the mom is coming for 2 weeks after the baby's born, and the concerns start to come up about, the way she might do things against the way I think I want to do them, given what I've studied and learned in life. And so, I really start unpacking with people a really simple conversation that they might be able to have while they're still pregnant before mom arrives, to lay the groundwork for that. What are your thoughts on preparing?
For sure. Yeah, it's a really good time, particularly when I have the opportunity to start seeing parents during pregnancy or during an adoption phase, before placement, to start unpacking what are some of the concerns that they have about, how involved do you want your family? I noticed that you live across the country from your relatives. Did you do that on purpose? Tell me a little bit. Is that how much breathing room you needed? And if that's the case, does it really make sense to move somebody in for a month, especially within the first weeks? Do you need that time to nest with your partner? Do you, want them to come a little bit later, after if you come home, or after delivery? And just talking about what are some of the things, getting clear about some of the things you're most worried about or things you're most annoyed about. And then we sort of go through, it's not quite a role play, but what are some ways to bring up these conversations? Are these conversations you or maybe your partner or a sibling can help, have? You're probably going to have these conversations more than once. Where do you set your boundaries? Like, what is your minimum standard in terms of boundaries? What's your ideal, your pie in the sky? Can you be happy and flexible in between? And let's troubleshoot that now with real examples. I mean, we will write things out. Like, this is the message I want to send. Let's write it out and get really clear on what it is for you. And then you choose the way you want to deliver that. Because we definitely it's a lot of parent stuff and it's a lot of in-law stuff that comes up, for sure.
Oh yeah, definitely. That is for sure. Another thing that I am starting to see a pattern of is our discussions around what someone believes while they're still pregnant about their future self in terms of work or home. So it goes all directions, right? It's I am I identify very much with my professional self, and I know I want to go back to work rapidly, or I have identified this way, but I'm certain I want to be a stay-at-home mom for at least a period of time, or the reverse of these things, right? And there's this point where we can feel really sure we know ourselves. And then 50% of the time, I'm going to say, again, I am wildly guessing here, but about 50% of the time, someone wakes up from the early postpartum fog of the typical kinds of issues and is like, oh, that's not what I really want. I'm not ready to go back to work, or, oh my God, I'm more ready to go back to work than I ever imagined I would be. What are those conversations like in your world?
Well, and I mean, we've talked about it before. I do like to bring in humor and funny anecdotes to things, but when that conversation starts, then I tend to go down a path of, you wake up tomorrow and you have a tail. Tell me what your life's going to be like. And people look at me like I'm crazy. I'm like, no, just throw it out. Give me a typical day. And they continue to look at me like, where's the punchline? And the punchline's kind of in the question. If you've never been a parent, you have no idea. And if you've been a parent of one, but never been a parent of two, and you're about to have a second child, you still have no idea. So be careful how much you cling to, I'm anti-pregnancy plan. And that sounds strong, but I'm anti-delivery plan. I'm almost anti-postpartum plan, to the extent that we fixate. I think it's great to have some ideas of what we would like it to be, but we have to understand that we might change our minds, or our experiences might demand that we pivot. And if we hold too tightly to what it looks like, then we have just invited in anxiety and depression and angst and lots of arguments with our loved ones and all of these things. We've made it harder on ourselves. So yeah, we talk about tails.
I love that. And I'll take this opportunity to say, so Jen, I didn't say this at the beginning, but Jen is one of the experts that is in our Thriving After Birth course. So she provides, a significant portion of the mental health content in that course. And in that course, I wonder if you'll remember this and the context or not. You have a sweater analogy.
Yeah, I have a sweater analogy.
What's
I have
the
an analogy
sweater?
for everything.
I do.
And I always have a disclaimer. I'm like, okay, I'm going to give you the worst analogy ever, but just sit with me for a second.
They are not. I don't know that I've ever heard one from you that's not good. So tell us your sweater analogy. What was that one about? Because I don't in this moment remember exactly what it's about, but I know I love it.
It's about choosing your therapist, and
Right.
it's really about this idea that I will meet people through the journey. I mean, I've had terrible therapists. I am a therapist. I'm going to be a terrible fit for somebody, but really trying to communicate very early on, if I'm talking with somebody about the potential of therapy, is to say, treat it like a sweater. You would not walk into a store, and if you were cold, and find the first sweater in front of you, put it on and walk right out. You would look at the size, you would look at the color and the fabric and how much it cost and all these other variables before you would decide whether that was a good fit for you. I mean, we know that. We don't even have to think about that. And so the fact that we would treat therapy in a way that I hear so often, I went to one, it was a terrible experience, so I gave up therapy. I decided therapy wasn't for me. And I say that's about as reasonable as sweaters aren't for me. Because I walked in one day and, put this random thing on and it didn't fit and I hated it. So I decided, well, I'm done with this. You've got to, you're talking about somebody who's going to meet your needs in some of the most vulnerable places in your life. And what we know about the research of therapy says, regardless of the treatment method used, more than 70% of the success of therapy is based on the goodness of fit between the therapist and the client, which means you have to nail that fit.
Okay, so on the note of that, I really love that you acknowledge, as probably all therapists, I hope do, but at least should, that, there's so much that's left to chance in terms of that connection. I get that. But, the vast majority of my clients have really, really enjoyed working with you. Now, some of that, I'm sure, is your personality and the way you play with analogies and all the things that I love about you. But some of it is about the way you have evolved in terms of how you deliver your work as a therapist. I don't know if I'm saying anything clear yet for our listeners' sake here, but what I'm saying is this idea that with you, people are not just stuck showing up week after week after week after week into like infinity. There's something you do that I know without having been there is different than what most people do. And while you were giving us your history, you actually said something that I jotted down because I wondered maybe that's the root of it. And I'll be the first to admit, I don't really understand what life coaches are out there doing. Full disclosure, not a clue. It kind of doesn't sound like a real profession to me. And yet I know people have them and love them and all that stuff. I probably need to go down a rabbit hole and learn something. But when you mentioned, you used that phrase that you were doing something in the vein of life coaching. And I thought, I wonder if that's what's different about what you're doing, is that background in life coaching, because what you're doing just doesn't sound like therapy when it's spit back to me. So can you tell us what it is and when it happened for you that you started doing things really differently?
Well, I think there were three components of that. One is I was trained at the University of Texas in Austin, and it was during a time where brief solution focused therapy was kind of at the forefront of what social work programs like the one I was in were doing. In Zuckerberg and DeShazer, I think up in Chicago. Anyway, you can look them up. But brief solution focused therapy, what it was looking at is in 1997, there was a Medicare Act that basically said insurances, managed care, insurances are coming in and they're going to take over this idea of healthcare and mental health care. And so if you want to get the care, you go through them. And typically they're going to give you 4 to 6 sessions. And then after that, you're going to have to make a case for additional sessions after that. And so the traditional therapies, that were back from the 50s and 60s said, what? Therapy only works if people are on your couch for years. And we could no longer do that almost overnight. There wasn't really going to be a space for that. And so people were looking for what therapeutic models could actually, get any traction in that amount of time. And brief solution focused was one of the well-researched models that said, you can do a lot in 4 to 6 sessions. You really can. And so that's, I'm trained as a cognitive behavioral therapist, but equally so as a solution-focused therapist. The other part of solution-focused therapy that I love, it's strength-based. So we don't look at problems, we look equally at solutions. We ask questions like, when in your life, did you notice the problem not there? What was different then? When in your life did you have the problem and you solved it? How'd you solve it? How long has it been since you've had this problem? If you had it then, and then there was a space of time that you didn't have it, and then you had it again. Well, how do you think you didn't have it in this space in between? So we're really digging into strengths, people's own ability to problem solve and create their own solutions, and ultimately their resilience. So that's one piece of it. I think the second piece of it was I worked in an emergency room. So some people I would see for 20 minutes and some people I would see for hours. And that is as much time as I had to make any sort of difference. And that difference might not be, crisis intervention is very different from therapy. But in terms of if in my mind, this person would really benefit from therapy, then I had to make a sell for why therapy would even be worth it for them to go and seek out when they left, or why going to that treatment center and getting help for an addiction might be worthwhile. And so you immediately had to build rapport. You immediately had to create a sense of not false, but real education and respect around some of these resources so that you could engage people, motivate them to take the next step. And that next step was, being a crisis work was not going to be you. It was going to be some other agency, some other person. I think the third thing was being burned out on a crisis model and realizing I wanted to be in prevention. And at the time I was doing that, this idea of life coaching was really gaining traction, at least in, the United States. And so I thought, well, I'll bite. And I hired a life coach for myself because I was curious how it was different than what I did. And then after I completed life coaching with them, I trained under them to learn what they did, to see how I could add the best parts of that. Because some people come to therapy and really what they need is more, it fits more with a life coaching model. And life coaching, you ask kind of how is it different? It's just in ways it's a little more formulaic. If you think about it it asks very specific questions. Each session, it says, what's your goal? Okay, my goal is to change a career. Okay, but I don't know what that career is going to look like. I just know I feel stuck in this one. So you walk them through 10, 12, 15, sessions of asking very specific questions for them to dig deeper and deeper and deeper and to sort of start to come up with what is it and what do I do next? So when I think of therapy as recovering, I think of coaching as discovering. And I think they complement each other very well if done by, the right practitioner.
Well, it also seems that the perinatal period, because while it's not well defined in terms of where it begins and ends, it is a mere phase of one's life. Yep. And so it lends itself well to strategies that are shorter term.
To your point about particularly the postpartum experience, when you're looking at it from the framework of matrescence, there is a step-by-step, right? There's the newborn phase, there's the infancy, there's feeding, there's sleeping, there's schedules. So there's a lot of logistical hurdles that you're jumping alongside adapting to how that feels. And the logistical hurdles would be coaching. How do you navigate those? And how do I feel about navigating those? And what's the impact? That's the therapy. If I had a personal trainer, they could show me these wonderful ways of understanding my body and give me very specific ways of using my body to achieve greater health, mobility, endurance, any number of goals I might have. But if I go there every Tuesday for an hour and do nothing, sit at home and eat donuts in between, nothing's really going to change. I'm going to have all this knowledge, but I haven't translated that into new habits, new ways of being. I'm not showing up differently in my world. And that's where you get the traction.
Right. And so what you were saying to me was so much of the work that you do together is about giving people strategies that are effective for them and that they're actually going to go out into the world and use. And that is what can't be cookie cutter. But that's what's special about what you do is you're so present for whoever's in front of you that it's not going to be the same set of solutions for every person, which is, I think, again, why we're so compatible, because my program never, ever, ever looks the same way twice. Mm-hmm. It just can't, because people come to me with their own unique concerns, and then their birth unfolds in its own unique way, and then their baby is its own unique human being, and so on and so forth, right?
Yeah.
So when
people have stories, they come into this parenthood journey already with several chapters of their lives that have impacted them. And so that's what changes the story. That's what you have to know. I mean, if somebody has a certain faith, is from a certain culture, has a certain socioeconomic situation, has a different education, lives urban versus rural, it's all of these things, had a miscarriage before they got pregnant, had an abortion before they got pregnant. It changes the conversation. Like, you have to be able to take in all this rich information and synthesize it and then sort of customize the strategy to really fit who's in front of you. And then I tell people, I don't want you on my couch forever. In fact, I don't have any couches in my office anymore, just to prove that. Only chairs, and they're not that comfortable. And so that people get this idea of like, no, my job is to put me out of a job to get you out there living your best life. And then you come back when you need an oil change. You come back when something's, or something under the hood and it's making noise and I don't know what it is. And I say, well, then come on back and let's have another conversation. We'll roll up our sleeves together. And the key is together, and take a look at it and see what we can do. Then you've got to, I can't go out and live your best life. You've got to go and do that.
You just gave the second analogy that I was very much looking forward to giving.
Cars.
Absolutely.
Mechanics.
Yep. Have you spent a lot of time in your life listening to the show Car Talk on NPR?
I haven't, thank goodness. I am aware of it. But I grew up with a lot of car loving folks in my family.
All right.
And I look at that and I say that a lot with my male clients. I'm, sometimes it's the way you describe therapy, right? That I'm like, what, I'll tell people, you treat your teeth or you treat your cars better than you treat your mind and your heart, so what are you doing? Like, why is that weird to go to couples therapy to make your marriage great, but you wouldn't bat an eye at a 30,000 mile checkup, right? That's just what we do. And it's relating to stigmas of mental health and mental illness and what this all means. It's the way it's the reason I'm called Moxie and not something's wrong with you, therapy.com, so people, out even in my community, nobody, you walking into a place called Moxie, nobody knows if you're getting, therapy or a haircut. Nobody knows. It's nobody's business. But just trying to, normalize things, reduce stigma, and create more of a culture of, asking for help, getting it, and then getting back out there. Makes sense to me. And therapy's expensive.
Yeah.
And time is hard to find. We live very busy lives. So we got to make use of what we, of the little amount of time we've got and get back to living, to all the other obligations.
How has, COVID-19 and the whole virtual health movement affected your practice? Do you think that it is equally good? Do you think it's a very case-by-case basis? What are your thoughts on virtual therapy sessions?
I think virtual can absolutely be as effective as in-person therapy. I never shut down to in-person therapy, so I kept doing both the whole time. The only time where I prefer in-person therapy is sometimes on a first meeting, especially if it's a client that's somewhat resistant to this whole idea of therapy. Sometimes if they're in the office and they can kind of see me and, look around and it helps sort of give them a sense of, orientation to the space as well as to the conversation, particularly if it's a new couple. Sometimes couples can be a little bit difficult to navigate sort of the nuances of back and forth, and at least until we get to know each other and the rhythm of conversation. Outside of that, though, I found it very effective. And for a lot of people during COVID, it's opened up a whole new world, because teletherapy wasn't very much, not only was it not supported, it was really looked down upon. And you weren't allowed to do it in several states. And to me, that was barriers to access for a lot of people that, can't leave their homes or workplaces or caregiving situations for any number of reasons. And so this opened that up. It kind of leveled the playing field. You had to have an internet connection or at least a phone line. But that seems to me, my social work roots, it's about accessibility and trying to level the playing field. And so, I feel like this has really opened that up. I'm grateful.
Yeah.
Silver linings.
Yeah, no, I love everything you just said about that. And my last question is one that I think can be looked at through the lens of who are we speaking to, consumers of healthcare or healthcare providers. And I'd love it if you could kind of approach it from both ways. I've been thinking a little bit as we've been talking, and I didn't ever plan to ask this question, but it came up for some reason based on our conversation. I was thinking about clients on medication. Mm-hmm. And I think clients really struggle and I think providers do too, and this is why I'm saying it from both sides, with the idea of who should be managing those medications. And clearly we know that it could be your primary, it could be your OBGYN or your midwife, it also could be a psychiatrist. And I'm wondering if you have personal thoughts that will help. I'm specifically thinking of midwives when I think of providers in this context, but all providers and even clients to understand how to choose who the best person is for that piece of the puzzle.
Absolutely. I think whenever I'm talking about medication, I sort of think of chemicals in your body, and I want the chemist involved. So whoever knows the most about how those chemicals relate and interrelate with other, metabolism and other medical conditions and things in your body. I want somebody that really knows their stuff. And I don't just want a psychiatrist, if that's who we're thinking about, or a neurologist in some cases. I want somebody who's got a maternal mental health, reproductive health, perinatal, OB focus. That's not always reasonable, or not always accessible, or both, not always affordable. I sort of feel like we got to start with what we've got and then see if we can get somebody else to help manage that. That being said, which is probably not answering the question definitively, I have a real hard time with those same specialists being involved, being the drivers of medication management, because their model of management, it's the system, it's not them, but oftentimes it's a 15-minute once a month check-in.
This is certainly why I asked the question, because on one hand, logic says the psychiatrist should be, in theory, the person who knows the most, but I'm so maddened by the gatekeeping model.
Yes, because they know the most about the drug and how the drug interacts with a human body, but they don't know the human body in front of them. They don't know the collection of experiences and environmental factors. They don't know, they're not seeing them every week and really in that trusted provider environment where somebody's really opening up about how they're doing. They're not able to sort of track moods like those of us who see clients more frequently. And so then that almost puts them in a, I don't want to say malpractice framework, but they're treating based on an algorithm of what they know, but not based on the individual oftentimes. And that's where I really believe in collaborative care.
So someone that I didn't mention in my list of possible professionals, and I can't say I know a ton about what makes them different, but I wonder if you do, is psychopharmacologists.
Yeah. I mean, they're pharmacy, but strategic in medications for mood disorders is basically like that's their specialty.
Yeah, I respect your inability to outright answer the question, but it clearly could be a whole podcast episode just unpacking.
Well, it could. It's just what it does. The answer to the question is we all need to be sitting at the table. The care coordination and that holistic, and it's nothing against the H, but when I say it, I mean the WH, holistic care, is that I should be in a conversation with, if we're talking about somebody with depression, anxiety, or any number of issues that needs or is on medication, then there needs to be as much communication between providers as there is between provider and client. And that's how it's done correctly. And that's how it's done ethically, in my opinion. So offline, I can tell you, I can join you in your anger, but.
Fair enough. Well, I know you have clients waiting, and I really appreciate your time. And I've so wanted to share you with my listeners. And so I really, really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today.
Well, you are welcome. Thanks for letting me get on my soapbox for a bit and just chat shop. So.
Awesome. Thanks.
We'll catch up soon.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye. everyone. It's me, Tanya, your host here at the Mother Wit Podcast. You know I sometimes invite my clients on the show to talk about their birth stories and postpartum experiences, but I want to tell you a little bit more about what those clients and I actually do together. I started Mother Wit to help people in the perinatal period achieve their health and wellness goals. That means whether you're hoping to conceive and struggling with high blood pressure or high blood sugar, or you're having trouble managing anxiety or depression in the postpartum period, or maybe you just need support and advocacy between prenatal or postpartum visits, I can help. Get a discount on your first consultation with me at motherwitmaternity.com using the code FIRSTCONSULT 10% off. That's 10% symbol, all one word. I'm looking forward to working with you and maybe having you on the show too.